Hey folks, welcome to Black Gumbo Southern Gardening. It's time for question and answer episode number 12. Well, we're on episode 12 now of question and answer. Now this is where I take your questions that you ask me either in my community tab on my channel or in the threads underneath all these videos. I'll go and I'll select questions that I think I can answer rightly, and I'll put them together in a video and give you a little more information than I usually can in the comment thread. So this is episode 12. Let's get started. Question number 1 comes from Cynthia Goodall, and she asked me, what planting trays are you using for your lettuce seedlings? Well, when starting seedlings, you can use trays, you can use anything. I use these. These are the trays that I've been using. This is a PropTech tray. It's a 162 cell tray, and you can see in there that the little cells there are angled, and so you get a little angled plug, and that helps them come out easy. You can also see behind it, it's got these holes. These holes help in watering, but they also help you to pop the seed out with a little nail or something. Pop the seedling out as a plug. And these come in real handy. I like them because they're durable, they are indestructible, they'll last for years, and man, 162 seedlings. You can get them in different sizes. The problem with 162 seed size is the cells are very small. So you've got to transplant these sooner than you would if you had a larger cell, such as something like these cheap cells. These are a little bit larger because they're not quite as angled, but you can still get a whole lot of these cheap little cells together in a tray, in a standard size tray. You can even get larger ones. The larger the cell is, the longer you can leave your starts in the tray before you have to transplant them. I used to use these Jiffy brand. This is these Jiffy trays that are just vacuform plastic. They're really cheap. They're real flimsy, and they break pretty soon, especially if you leave them outside and the sun starts to degrade the plastic. But the good thing about these trays is that they come with these clear covers that you can put over the tray, and that helps to keep the moisture in, and that's helpful sometimes. If you're using these PropTech trays, you have to put them in a plastic bag, a clear plastic bag, if you really want to keep that moisture in there and keep the humidity up. And I've done that with tomatoes. It worked just fine. You can plant in these little cheap cups that you recycle when you buy plants at the store. You can start seeds in just about anything. I've started seeds in open trays that are don't have any cells whatsoever. Tomatoes perform especially well that way because you can divide them easily. But yeah, that's the one I use. I use PropTech. In fact, I've got one going right here. You can see what they look like when they're loaded with compost. And this one's got onion seeds in it that have not come up. I think the seed was old and stored improperly. So yeah, you can get a lot of seeds in these PropTech trays, and I like them a lot because they're indestructible. Now, they are not cheap. They will set you back a little bit. What are you going to do? Buy seed trays every couple of years and spend the money over time, or are you going to invest in it up front and get an indestructible seed tray that'll last you 10, 20 years or more? The next question comes from my friend Eric. Actually, I grew up with Eric, and we were friends, lived on the same street, went hunting together a lot. So Eric asked me, what are some secrets for growing cabbage? And I have to say, we're growing cabbage here in zone 9A. We're kind of on the border of 9A and 9B, and we're growing cabbages in the winter. So cabbages, yeah, I've got some cabbage starts right here. These are some cabbage starts that I purchased at the store. I didn't start my seeds this year, but I started seeds last year. And starting cabbage seeds should be done in trays like this, or in the tray that I just showed you, about 8 weeks before you intend to set them out. And for me, I like to set them out in the middle of October. That gives you time for your cabbages to get established before we have any frost here. So cabbages are really good for a winter garden in zone 9A because they can tolerate frost, and they can tolerate freezing conditions down to about 20 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on your cultivar. But these cabbages are a hybrid cabbage. These are Bonnie's Best, and I don't mind growing Bonnie plants if I didn't start my seed. That's about the size I want to grow them up to. Well, actually, you can plant them out about half this size, but that's a good size for planting out. These are pretty healthy plants, and these are my extras. You want to plant cabbages in real fertile soil. Let me show you where my cabbages are. Cabbages do well in very fertile soil that's well draining because cabbages are heavy feeders. And so I've got my cabbages here. These are the starts that I put in from the Bonnie trays that you just saw. And they are in this garden soil that is very filled with organic material. You can see there that that is not just clay, sand, or silt, or dirt. That is filled with organic material. In fact, there's about 3/4 of an inch of compost that I placed on top of this bed. And over the years, that's what I do with this bed, is I put compost on top, and that compost works into the soil and keeps it nice and loamy, keeps the soil life happy, and that's what you want. Happy soil and fertile soil makes for fertile plants. Now, cabbages are really heavy feeders, and since they're a leafy vegetable, even when they head up, they're still just made of leaves. You want to give them some nitrogen fertilizer throughout their growing period. You know, 2 or 3 times, hit them with some liquid fish fertilizer, fish emulsion, or anything that has nitrogen in it. You can top dress with compost. The thing about cabbages in the soil is it's real fertile soil, and if it's real loose soil and has a lot of organic material in there, it's going to be well draining. You want that too. You don't want cabbage roots sitting in soil that's wet and soggy and waterlogged, or the roots are going to rot. Another thing you might consider about cabbages is every creature in the world loves cabbages, especially slugs and snails. So if you put down a wood mulch on here, you're going to want to stay on top of treating with iron phosphate pellets for slugs, because they'll get down in all those leaves and just live a happy life in there, and you don't want to crunch into a snail shell when you're having your sauerkraut. So cabbages, yeah, they like really fertile soil, and you just plug them in. They're really easy to grow. You can see here the spacing. I like to put my cabbages at this kind of a spacing, about 24 inches apart for a large head. The larger spacing you give a cabbage, the more its roots can go out and mine for materials and explore the garden. And when you do that, the cabbage heads will grow larger. If you plant them closer together, plants tend to know, if you can call it knowing. They're not sentient beings, but they do grow smaller if they're planted closer together. So these cabbages are about 24 inches apart on all sides, and they'll grow into a full-size head that way. You can plant some quick-growing crops down the middle or in between your cabbages if they're going to come out before your cabbages need all that space. And I've done that in some of my other beds with radishes. Radishes will be out before the cabbages, and the kales and the brassicas need all that space. You can see here, this is not a cabbage, but it is a brassica. This is a Brussels sprout, and it will take a while to grow. Right next to it and all around these Brussels sprouts are radishes that are coming up. And these radishes will be out of here before the Brussels sprouts need that space. So spacing, fertile soil, well-draining soil, and other than that, it's just a waiting game. Okay, the next question comes from Jacqueline. She says, I sowed carrots, parsnips, and radishes, but weeds pop up, and she's afraid that she can't tell the difference between the weeds and the sprouting vegetables. Any tips? Yes, unfortunately, that comes with growing and getting used to seeing what comes up and what your seedlings look like. I would suggest, if you don't know what things look like when they come up, to get online and watch some YouTube videos of people who are doing that specific crop that you're growing. Like radish seeds look very peculiar when they come up. They look a lot different than, say, a morning glory sprout. I'll show you some weeds that I have and how I've come to know them over the years, and I can tell what they are just by looking at them. That comes just, unfortunately, with time, or with doing research on YouTube or on the internet, finding out what your seedlings look like. Okay, what I have coming up here and all over there is called perpetual spinach. It is a Swiss chard, and one of the reasons I know that this is my chard, well, I planted it here, but you can see that I know that chard has kind of a purplish stem, and you can see that there's a purplish stem there. But if I go over here, there's a couple of strays over here. Are these chard or are they weeds? What about those guys? I think they're all chard. But right next to it, you can see these little guys coming up in here, and they're a little bit different. And these are not like anything I've planted. Those are actually weeds, these little guys right here. You just get to know that. Here's another example right here. I've got 3 different kinds of weeds growing. Now, these are radish sprouts, and I know they're radish sprouts because radishes come up with these 2 big leaves that are almost heart-shaped, And you just kind of get to know what a radish looks like when it sprouts by planting radishes. And so if I pluck this guy out, you can see it's got those 2 leaves. And if you're unsure and you have a lot of plants like this together, pluck one out. If it's a radish, you can break this leaf and it'll smell like a radish. Right next to it though, this guy here, that's a morning glory vine. That is a very invasive weed that is in this garden, and I hate these. So I always pluck those out. And I can tell they're morning glory vines because of the way the leaves look. And if you're not sure what you've got here, just pluck it up, take that leaf and get one of the apps that tells you what you're growing, and sometimes they'll hit on what it is. Another example, these are my carrots, and all the carrots are starting to come up. Now I can tell that those are carrots because they're in lines, and I planted them in lines. So that's another good tip to, if you're not sure what it looks like, if it's coming up generally in a line, you can tell, okay, these are all carrots then, because I put them there. But what about these? Are those carrots? Because they kind of look the same, but you can tell they're not quite the same, and those are not carrots. Furthermore, a weed is any plant you don't want in your garden, even if it's a good plant. These are volunteer tomato plants, and I have tomato plants coming up in my garden all over the place. Now I could transplant these, but it's winter. There's another tomato plant right there. There's all kinds of weeds in here, and so what I'll have to do is come through here when the plants get a little bit older and a little bit more mature and weed in between them. Weeding around and really close to these real young seedlings can sometimes damage their roots by pulling out the weed roots like that. So you might not want to do that. You can see over there, right there, there's a tomato plant that I'm going to let grow. That's among my beets over there, and I don't mind that one, so I'm going to see what happens with it. Okay, the next question comes from George Panag, and he asks, Scott, what about your potted citrus trees? Do you still have them? And what about the feeding schedule that you follow on potted citrus? That's a good question. I do love citrus. As you can see, I've got my Meyer lemon growing here. This is an in-ground tree, not a potted tree, and I don't really do anything with this tree. I don't fertilize it much. Oh, if I'm thinking about it and I have some extra fertilizer that is left over from doing the garden, I'll spread it around the base here, but that tree is mostly on its own and it does fine. Let's look at the potted plants. Okay, so here are my potted citrus plants. These are orange trees, and you can see they're putting on fruit. These are probably 3-year-old trees, and they're all grafted, so they're in pots, and I intend to keep them in pots. These need to be up potted. Currently they're in these nursery containers that are about 3 to 5 gallons in size, and they're deeper than they are wide, and that's generally a good practice for these trees that like to put their roots down. But you asked me how I care for them. I will come in and trim the lower branches that come off just to keep a good shape to my tree, and I'll do that any time of year. You always want to trim off the little branches that come up on the portion of the trunk that is the rootstock. You can see, if you look closely at a citrus tree that's been grafted, you can see the graft, and anything below the graft, you don't want what's growing off of that. That is usually a really strong and tough rootstock designed to give you real healthy roots and real strong roots. It's usually some version of citrix or some rootstock designed to be a rootstock. You don't want the fruit that comes off of that, and you don't want the thorns that usually form on the branches. So if you see a branch coming off, a sucker coming off of the rootstock, trim it off. That's the first thing. Feeding, I feed mine once a month, and I feed them this Jack's citrus feed. I'm not getting paid by Jack's. You could use any kind of feed, but it's a citrus feed. It's 20-10-20. Helps to develop strong roots and also helps in blossoms, and blossoms equal fruit. So yeah, this is not organic. I don't mind fertilizers that are not organic, especially in my potted plants, because, well, I'm not putting this stuff in commercial agricultural amounts, and so the salts and the residues that tend to make people wary of these kinds of fertilizers don't build up in my soil. These are potted plants. The soil doesn't get recycled very often, and I'm not worried about it. I mean, chemicals are chemicals, but that's why I don't mind using this stuff. I know it's pure. I know it's pure chemical. It's what it says on here. You can look at what's in it. And what's in there is all the stuff your plant needs. Your plant doesn't know the difference between a chemical that has been isolated in a laboratory or in a production line as opposed to a chemical it finds in the soil of an organic mix. Now, the good part about organic stuff is that it often comes with all the micronutrients that your plants need and thrive on. All the minerals, all the micronutrients, all the trace elements that you need. But with this stuff, it's actually got a lot of that added in there. Boron, copper, iron, magnesium, molybdenum, zinc, sulfur, magnesium, all the stuff your plant needs, and it's designed for citrus. So I like this stuff. I've been feeding my plants not as religiously as I ought to. In fact, I should feed them now. Now this stuff is blue. That's an unnatural blue. It's just a dye though, so you can see that you've got your fertilizer and it's in your water so you don't make any mistakes. So it calls for, I just use the instructions on the back. My citrus grower told me that this stuff's just fine. He has the largest collection of citrus in the state of Texas, the largest private collection, and he's the one who propagated these and sold them to me. So I'll take his word for it and just follow the instructions here. 1 tablespoon per gallon of water. I've got a 2.5 gallon watering can here, so I'm just going to put 2 heaping tablespoons in there. And that's that. And then I'll just water my plants in with this stuff. I like to water these until I see some irrigation draining out through the holes in the bottom. Get them good and soaked. There we go. The thing you have to remember about any plant that you're growing in a pot, especially if that plant's going to live there its entire life, is you've got to fertilize it on a regular basis, because all it has to live on is what's in that pot, and it's going to deplete the nutrients in that soil really quick. And so with a good fertilizing regimen, you can give that plant what it needs to survive, but you got to stay on top of it. I like to write the dates of my fertilizing on top of the container of fertilizer that I'm using, or on the side or whatever with a Sharpie, and that lets me know that you know, I'm on schedule. I've skipped a month. And in the summertime, I tell you what, especially my fig plants, it's hard to stay on schedule because it's just hot, and it's you know, when your plants need that fertilizer, it's hard to get out there and give it to them. So write the date on top, or keep a card with your fertilizer, whatever it takes. Just keep on a regular schedule because the plant needs everything you give it. Okay, I had a question from Cindy Lott that asks, I have a compost question. Well, I love compost. She says, can dried dog food be put in your compost? She's been feeding a stray dog and has a lot of food left over to put in her compost, if that's safe. Well, Cindy, here's your answer. There's some dry dog food. Straight in the compost. Yes, it's actually really good stuff. Dry dog food is usually meat and bone byproducts. Sometimes it's, you know, if you buy the better stuff, it's meatless. It's got a lot of grains in it. All of that stuff is good stuff for your compost. It is all organic matter that's going to break down and add to the life of your soil. There are some caveats, though. In my compost, you can see there's the dog food, but you can see that it's pretty dry. And I put that in there on the top, and guess what's going to happen? Vermin are going to come. Now, I don't mind vermin usually in my compost pile. They come in and they eat stuff, and if they stick around any length of time, gorging themselves on all this wonderful stuff like pineapples and kitchen scraps and garden leftovers and dry dog food, what they're going to do is they're going to leave their deposits behind, and all of that is helpful to your compost. So I don't really mind them in here until they get out of control. If you put a lot of dog food in at one time, you're going to attract a lot of rats. So I would suggest putting your compost, your dog food in your compost bin, and then mixing it in and stirring it around, just so the smell of that isn't as powerful as dumping an entire bag in here, and it won't attract as many pests. If it does attract pests, well, there's your answer. I've been trapping rats because the rats that come to my compost bin have been coming from my neighbor's yard right over there, and they live just behind that fence, and Phoebe chases them through these holes down here because it's real thick back there, and they like to live back there and then come in here and eat. Well, that's fine until the population gets so large that then they have to eat out of my garden, and that's what I've been experiencing. They've been ranging out that way around the corner and going over there into my garden. They're not a problem at this moment. I don't have any crops that they like to eat, but they really did a number on my cowpeas and my sweet potatoes and my peppers this year. So you will keep that in mind whenever you're putting dog food in your compost. Final question today comes from Norma Gomez, and it's kind of a fun question. She asks, I was wondering who plays the guitar on your videos. She says it's very nice. Well, thank you. If you have any questions for me that are gardening related, especially if they happen to be zone 9 or winter gardening, please leave a comment down below. I'll be happy to try to get to them in the comments. And if I can't get them in the comments, maybe someone else in the comment section will, because we have a really thriving community of people here. Also, if it's a really good question and something I think I can demonstrate, maybe you'll see your question in the next Q&A. Episode 13 will be coming up. Who knows when, but in the future. So leave a comment below. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to our channel, and we will talk to you next time. Happy gardening. Bye-bye.